later.
Hello, everyone. We're just letting people in before we get going in a minute. While we're waiting, I'd quite like to ask if there's anybody here from an unusual place. Is anybody here from outside Sydney, Melbourne, not in a city? Unmute yourself and say hello and tell us where you're from. Really?
I'm from Israel.
Fantastic. Lovely to have you. It's always wonderful to have people from Israel.
At the moment, it's just wonderful to be here. But anyway,
yes, I'm Aranka. I'm from Melbourne.
Hello, Aranka. Welcome. Anyone from Brisbane? No. Anyone from Perth?
Anyone from Caulfield? Yay!
Oh, yes, there are people from Perth. Fantastic. Say hello.
I'm from South Australia.
Oh, Jen, very welcome. It's very nice to have you here. One of the things that we pride ourselves on in these webinars is having people from all around the country and people who come from all sorts of different walks of life and with different sorts of backgrounds and different sorts of political perspective. We're Jewish women coming together to make the world a better place, and that's an amazing thing.
We've had somebody who else has said they're also from Adelaide, from Hermanang country.
Fantastic.
And with that, I think we should get started.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Melinda Jones. I'm the National President of National Council of Jewish Women of Australia, and it's my great pleasure to have you all, invite you all here this evening to join us in a discussion of such a sad and important question of our times. Before we get down to the issue of violence against women, I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. I'm sitting on the land of the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. You know, and a couple of people have said to me, why would I want to pay my respects to the Indigenous elders? Right now, we've got a much bigger battle to fight. It's not about the referendum, that's over. So let's just move forward. And my response is, you know, when all these things are over, we have got to be grounded in Australia. We want Australia to be the country we want it to be, and that's a country where everybody respects everybody else. It's good for Jews for everybody to respect everyone else. So even if you don't want to respect anybody else, you should do it out of self-interest. But of course, I'm sure that's not the case. That we want this country to be a strong country, and we want lessons from our country of the way we've made this country strong to also be able to be transported to Israel so we can find places where we can help improve the situation in Israel in any way possible. Tonight, we have one of the most incredible women we could wish to have at a webinar. My friend Ruth Halperin-Kaddari is a woman of high standing. She's been in all sorts of places, and I'm going to introduce Leanne Basser before I do the introduction of Ruth, which Leanne is doing. So let's hand over to Leanne.
Thanks, Lindy. Hello, everybody. It's my really great pleasure to introduce to you my friend, Ruth Halperin-Kaddari. We've known each other for quite a long time. Ruth has been really a warrior for women all around the world. She's the founding director of an institute at Bar-Ilan University called the Rackman Institute, which has researched, advocated, worked for women, particularly around areas of violence and family matters. But Ruth's much, much more than that. She was previously, for many years, on the United Nations Committee for the Elimination of Discrimination against Women, and she's been the vice chair of that committee. She continues her involvement, having stepped down not very long ago from CEDAW. She continues her involvement speaking about and on behalf of women around the world. In the last 2 months, her focus has been more on what's happening in Israel, and that's what we're here to hear from her tonight. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time, but just ask you to welcome Ruth, and I'll hand over to you, Ruthie.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Linda. And thank you all for having me here. Thank you for the introduction. I have to admit that I never imagined that my experience, my career, my years on the international and on the domestic front would actually bring me to deal with the issues that I've been dealing with for the past exactly 2 months now, since October 7th, or rather October 8th. But here we are. I have to give a warning. I've been asked to talk about, again, what I'm focusing on for the past 2 months, and this is the gendered aspects, or more specifically, the sexual violence that was tragically very much part of the October 7th attack of Hamas on Israel, and the efforts to have the international community, the outer world, recognize it, condemn Hamas, and continue with this path. And it's a very, very difficult subject. If I get to the need to go into more concrete descriptions, I will give a prior warning, and I will not go into the exact horrific details unless you want me to, and then whoever needs to mute the microphones will do so. What I thought I'd be doing tonight, it's morning in Israel, but it's nighttime at your part of the world. So what I thought I'd be doing is perhaps start a little bit with personal dimension, because it will, I think, give you a more concrete angle on how things are unfolding here in Israel since October 7th. So I'll start with this personal angle, and then I will continue with the facts as we know them now, the state of the investigation, the information that we have with respect to this issue of the sexual violence that was part of the massacre of October 7th. And then I will go on to describe our engagement with the international community, with the international human rights bodies, and with women's organizations outside Israel. And that's probably also where you can step in, and when you can also engage in these issues. On October 7th, I was actually not in Israel. I was staying at my son, my third son's, and my daughter-in-law, who just moved to Copenhagen on account of his graduate studies in environmental economy. And I was in the midst of a lecture tour, starting in Sweden and then continuing in Denmark, a lecture tour about the judicial overhaul in Israel. Maybe some of you remember, I think we've talked about it previously in what now seems like a totally different life, really. So that was the reason for my lecture tour, and I was about to continue to go on to the United States, to continue the lecture tour, and also to do fundraising for the Rackman Center. And they woke me up on October 7th in the morning. We were going to go to the synagogue, and they said a war had started. Of course, none of us understood what was happening in those very first hours. And in fact, until late at night on Saturday, the picture was not that clear, although many accounts and video clips, because as I'm sure you know, the Hamas terrorists came equipped with body cameras, intending to film and to broadcast in real time all the atrocities that they engaged in. And it's important to remember that, not just because it obviously is significant when we talk later about the denial campaign, which is now, as I'm sure you know, is now taking place all over the world. So it's not just relevant for combating the denial campaign, it's also relevant to prove the element of premeditation and intent and plan, which is really critical when we want to pursue the legal proceedings and when we want to have the world recognize that what happened here fits into the description of crimes against humanity and possibly even genocidal crimes against humanity. But this in square brackets, okay? So going back to Saturday, so videos started emerging and we started getting more information, but again, at that point, it was so unbelievable that it was really just hard to comprehend. But on Sunday, when the picture became clearer, and it was clear that thousands of Hamas terrorists invaded many locations in the envelope of Gaza in the south of Israel, and were there for many hours. Thank goodness, less than a day, but still, they had many hours to commit all their atrocities. To me, it was clear that sexual violence was also present. And it was clear to me because of my experience on the international arena, because of my 12 years on CEDAW, because I heard so many accounts from Rwanda and from DRC and from Darfur and from the Yazidis and from Syria. And of course, I read what's happening in Ukraine, and it couldn't have been otherwise. But it was also clear to me that maybe this is not so clear, neither to Israeli authorities nor to the world. And it was also clear to me that we must start our engagement with the outer world. What I also knew is that by coincidence, CEDAW was about to start its October session just on that Monday following October 7. And knowing how things are done within the committee, I knew that this is the opportunity to alert them to this and to demand that they issue a statement about what's happened, including addressing specifically the gender-based violence and the sexual violence that had been part of the massacre of October 7. But first, I called my longtime friend from CEDAW, Pramila Patten, who is the special representative of the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, on sexual violence in times of conflict. And it took me, again, I have to admit, it took me some hours on Sunday to actually, come to the realization that she is, in fact, in the exact position whose help we need now. And I called her and I said, Pramila, we need you to come here. And the first question that she asked me was, do you know if it actually happened? And then I realized that I wouldn't say we have a problem, but I realized that I have to be much more firm I have to know exactly what we know about what happened. And at that point already, some of those clips that floated on the internet on Saturday began to be deleted by Hamas. And at that point already, the disinformation, the misinformation, and the vagueness started taking place. So I made some calls to colleagues who are involved in all the work of rape crisis centers, because I figured that they would know. And I was right. Already at that point, they could tell me that they know of cases of, very few cases, of women who are already seeking help based on what happened, what they witnessed, or what they went through on Saturday. But what was also very, very clear already at that point is that the vast majority, we didn't know if all of them, but the vast majority of those who had been raped or assaulted had actually also been murdered. And this was the cruel intention and plan. And again, we need to bear in mind this word plan of Hamas terrorists, to keep them silenced, to silence them forever, so they cannot tell what happened, so that everybody knows, but the victims are not there to testify. So this was the situation on the Sunday after October 7. On Monday, a number of us, colleagues from other faculties, maybe some of you know Professor Francis Radai from Hebrew University, who at some point had also been a member of the CEDAW committee. We wrote a letter detailing what we knew at that point, also giving links to some media reports that already addressed the issue of sexual violence. And we sent the email to the CEDAW committee, to the CRC, to the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, to the Special Rapporteur on Enforced Disappearances, to UN Women, and to a number of other agencies, UN agencies, requesting all of them to issue statements acknowledging what took place on October 7, including sexual violence, saying this was amounting to crimes against humanity, calling for the immediate release of all the hostages, and of course condemning Hamas. A few days later, again, maybe some of you were involved in that because we approached all our colleagues worldwide. A few days later, we added to those letters a list of more than 800 names, signatories of law professors, international law professors, and gender and law professors from all over the world. US, UK, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, of course, not just from Israel. And we added these signatures to push for the reaction. And we waited. At the same time, and by that point, I was already on my way back to Israel. Of course, I canceled my trip that was planned to the US. At that point, as I mentioned before, not only me, but other colleagues with expertise, with knowledge, with experience. Sorry? If there's anything, if you want to stop me, if a point is not clear or something, so you can interrupt, but if not, then I'll just continue with my presentation. So a few of us, again, who with experience and knowledge and awareness, as I mentioned before, not just me, but others also understood that on the part of the Israeli authorities, there might be some discrepancy here in terms of lack of awareness that sexual violence, including rape and other forms of gender-based violence, were part of the terror attack. We understood that we also have to approach the Israeli authorities in terms of the investigative teams, in terms of the healthcare authorities, in terms of the treatment centers of welfare, all the agencies whose task will be to provide care and treatment to all the victims. And that's how we formed a task force of experts from various expertise, from various professions, and started engaging also with the Israeli authorities. Now, I want to clarify here, and again, in square brackets, maybe some of you who have been following the international media and what I termed the denial campaign noticed that Israel has not presented forensic evidence as taken from the bodies of the victims, the women's bodies of the victims. And that's true. And the reason for this is multifaceted. First of all, the number of the casualties amounted to more than 1,200. That means that the morgue that was established in one of the military bases in the south, it's called the Shura base, received hundreds and hundreds, and I'm sorry, now I'm going to go into difficult details, received hundreds and hundreds of body bags. Quoting from one of the reservists who worked at the Shura base and whose task was to identify the bodies of the female soldiers, she describes a scene from hell, sheer hell. Hundreds and hundreds of bodies piled on top of each other, and then hundreds and hundreds who got in with bodies that were, I'm missing the word in English now, that were
Mutilated?
Not just mutilated, but
Disemboweled?
Yes, thank you.
You mean dismembered, actually.
It's dismembered. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, dismembered. With limbs missing, with sexual organs missing, with heads disconnected. And their very first task was to identify, to be able to identify. During those first days, it was still not clear how many hostages were taken to Gaza. Family members were left in hell, not knowing whether their loved ones were murdered or are hostages or missing. For weeks, there were still people who remained missing because so many of the bodies were also burnt and it was impossible to identify them. So the very first task was to identify and to bring to burial, to bring this terrible uncertainty of the family members, to bring them to ease, to peace, if we can even use this word in this context. And the bodies were being brought under fire. For 3 days, the fighting actually continued in the south and in the Shura base. The people who worked there also explained that on many occasions, the bodies came in and there was fear that they are actually, that they had been
Booby trapped.
apologize.
Booby trapped.
Maybe, yes, but booby trapped?
Booby
Yeah.
trapped.
Yes, that's right. So again, thinking about taking forensic evidence was simply not on the level of what they had to be engaged in. Many of the bodies also came too late for taking any forensic specimens or forensic evidence, because it was more than 48 hours after the assaults, after the attack. But another reason is, and now I go back to our mission to engage with Israeli authorities, another reason is that it was really not part of the protocol, because this kind of attack had never been part of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, at least not since the establishment of the State of Israel. I'm not talking historically about what happened in the early 20th century, but since 1948, sexual violence was not part of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And so it was not part of the protocol. I talked to one of the physicians in the Soroka hospital, which is the largest hospital in the south, who received, I think, more than 700 injured on Saturday and more on the following days. She's in charge of the trauma room, of the sexual violence trauma room in that hospital. No patient was referred to her. And she's clear that the reason is that the women, and in fact the men too, they were not asked. They were not asked. It was not part of the protocol of intake, because it was never part of a terror attack. It's not something that you're supposed to ask a victim of a terror attack, at least until October 7. Of course, from now onwards, everything changed. But this, we have to bear this in mind when we ask ourselves, how come the talk about sexual violence took so long to emerge? So it actually took a while to emerge on Israel as well. But going back to the international arena, as I told you, we alerted these international bodies, and later on the international women's organizations. On the third week of the war, more letters were sent from Israel, 3 different letters, one from women's organizations in Israel to sister women's organizations worldwide, 2 again from experts, legal experts, to the international human rights bodies, and 3 from just women in Israel to women worldwide. So the attempt to have the world acknowledge this had started already on the very first week of the war. And the statements that started to be issued were extremely disappointing. Now I'm talking about various human rights mechanisms belonging to the UN, CRC, for example, or special rapporteurs, special mandate holders, and of course, unfortunately, the CEDAW committee. They all resorted to the conventional symmetry between Israel and Palestine. Recall that already on the third day of the war, Israel started its defensive onslaught on Gaza. And since then, what the world has seen are only pictures of the sufferings and the devastation and the increasing number of casualties of, including many women and children from Gaza, and all the horrors of October 7th in the minds of in the international media, in the minds of the public, world public opinion. The horrors of October 7th became something of the past, something of the history, and less and less attention is brought to the ongoing issue, and of course, ongoing war crime against humanity of the hostages, that even as we speak now, there are still 138 hostages in Gaza. But in terms of the world opinion, everything had changed already on the first week of the war. And so all these bodies used the familiar, infamous rhetoric, the false symmetry between Israel and Palestine, expressing concern as to the increasing violence in Israel and in Gaza, and saying that they all must comply with international human rights and humanitarian law. The worst, actually, the most disappointing statement came from CEDAW, and for me personally, this was really devastating. It was really a blow, because what they issued was so shallow. It just went on to say that the cause of peace is the cause of women, and to talk about 1325 and the importance of having women in peace building and peacekeeping. No mention of October 7, no mention of Hamas, no mention of sexual violence. In fact, none of these bodies uttered the words sexual violence. And perhaps also the worst was UN Women on October 25th, which maybe some of you know is the day commemorating the adoption of the historical Security Council Resolution 1325 in 2000, the resolution that for the first time ever recognized the increased vulnerability of women during armed conflicts, the risk of sexual violence, the need to combat it, the need to have women at the table in taking political decisions, etc., etc. And there was an event at the UN commemorating 23 years for the adoption of 1325. And I expected the director of UN Women, Sima Bauhaus, to relate, to mention the most recent horrific expression of what 1325 was there to prevent. She said nothing about Israeli women being victims to the terror, to the horror, to the atrocities of Hamas on October 7. Now I'm skipping a little bit. I was asked by the American delegation to the United Nations. That was, I think, on the 4th week or the 5th week of the war, to come and to brief the Security Council on sexual violence that took place on October 7th. Unfortunately, this did not materialize because the Chinese, who were then the presidents of the Security Council, blocked it. They did not allow the Americans to have me come and brief because I'm civil society or academia, and they said that they're not allowing from civil society or academia to come and brief. Anyway, I'm mentioning this because by knowing that I might have the opportunity to actually speak at the most important forum, political forum of the world on this issue, I also knew that I have to be able to say only verified and credible information of what we have. And so, and that is the reason that I was and I am being given access to investigation materials from the police and from the IDF, from the relevant sources, because the Israeli authorities, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, understand that I'm in a very unique position to be able to speak and have credibility based on my international standing, but I'm not government. It's not that I'm coming as a representative of Israel. And so even though Security Council did not happen, a week later, I did go to Geneva and I gave a closed session of briefing to ambassadors and to deputy ambassadors. And I met with several high-level officials in the Human Rights Council, including the High Commissioner on Human Rights. And last week, I gave numerous briefings to ambassadors here in Israel, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to now take a few minutes and to explain what the verified information we now have is. The bottom line is that there are no living survivors who are able or willing to speak now. Going back to what I said already at the beginning, most of them were killed, thus silenced forever. Those who survived, most of them had been taken hostage to Gaza. Maybe you saw one video that depicts, I think I can say her name because her mother actually wrote an open letter in the media this weekend. The woman's name is Naama Levy. She's a soldier, and she was seen taken off a truck wearing gray sweatpants, bleeding, and the front of her pants at the bottom in the area of the vagina is blooded. She's taken off the back of the truck. And in the video that was not published, but it is part of the investigative materials, she's being shoved into the van, and one man after the other entered that van. So last week, the spokesperson of the White House expressed concerns that the refusal of Hamas to release the 17 women who are at the age range between 20 to 40, the reason for their refusal is that they do not want them to be able to speak, to tell what they had been through. And these concerns have been corroborated by reports from hostages that did return to Israel a week ago during the temporary ceasefire, reporting on ongoing sexual violence that is ongoing in captivity. So this is one very strong evidence. The other, perhaps the strongest evidence, is from an eyewitness survivor who hid in the bushes. And I watched the taped statement that she gave in very, very graphic details, describing gang rape that took place next to where she hid, describing mutilation that was part of the gang rape. I will not go into details describing the exact mutilation, but it is the most extreme cruelty that human mind cannot even imagine. But she described it in very graphic details. She also described another Hamas terrorist carrying a naked woman on his shoulder next to that place. And this particular brave survivor was taken by the police to the area, and she identified the spot where she hid in the bushes, and she also identified the exact spot where the attack took place, and there were some personal items that were found there. So obviously this is corroborating her testimony. I watched a number of photographs and footage that was taken of bodies that were found in the area of the massacre in several locations. And again, it's important to emphasize the factor of several locations, not sporadic attack, more than one place, at least 4 or 5 places, all at the same time. And all the bodies exhibit the same signs of without clothes from the bottom down, the lower parts of the body naked or just underwear, torn underwear, bleeding from the vagina, many of them in position, their bodies, their legs are in positions that leave no doubt as to what had taken place either prior to their being shot or perhaps even after being shot. I forgot to mention that the testimony of the eyewitness also described how the woman, after being raped and mutilated, she was shot in the head. The photographs that I described that I saw match the description of the worker at the Shura base morgue, who also described the condition of the bodies of the soldiers, that her task, the task of her team, was to identify, also exhibiting the same marks, the same condition as those bodies that I described before. And all this is strongly corroborated by numerous testimonies of first responders describing the condition of the bodies, describing more than one and in more than one location, finding women handcuffed either to each other or to a bed, or at one case to shower, and again without clothes from the waist down, exhibiting clear signs of sexual assaults, and also exhibiting clear signs of sexual mutilations, genital mutilations by various means, which again, I will not go into the exact details. All this is verified information. Added to this is the statements given already by several Hamas terrorists who describe the instructions and the orders that they were issued prior to the attack to enter, to capture, to torture, to rape, and to murder as many as they can, to take hostages, to do that to women and to children and to teenagers. They use the words dirty them, and when asked what it means to dirty, they said it means to whore, to rape. And when asked how does this fit with Islamic teachings, they refer to a fatwa, a religious dispensation that was apparently issued so that they are permitted to engage in all these atrocities. As I explained in the UN in Geneva, and as I keep explaining in all the interviews that I'm giving, and I think that I've given probably more than 50 interviews to international media in the past 2 weeks. This, in my legal analysis, leaves no doubt Putting all these dots together leaves no doubt as to the conclusion that sexual violence and gender-based violence, and in square brackets, I'm now saying that I use the terms gender-based because in the past week, more testimonies started emerging about mutilation of men, not only of women. So close square brackets. It leaves no doubt that all these violence, all these atrocities were part of a preconceived and premeditated plan by Hamas to use the worst kind of horror and of terror against Israeli civilians, against Israeli population. And this fits the description, the definition in international law of crimes against humanity. According to the Rome Statute, which is the statute according to which the International Criminal Court has been established. I see that time is running out. Maybe I'll say a few words about where the international community stands now and where and what our aim is. What, for instance, I personally is working for. So a week ago, actually 10 days ago, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, for the first time in the Security Council, acknowledged openly that there are very disturbing, increasing reports of sexual violence that was part of Hamas attack. And in his tweet later at night, he actually mentioned Hamas, and this was a step forward. Following this route, UN Women finally on last Saturday, on December 1st, issued a statement, again, also acknowledging that sexual violence was part of Hamas attack on October 7th. And they call for a rigorous investigation. Now, in their statement, they mention the Commission of Inquiries, and they say that this is the proper body that should investigate. This is wrong. The Commission of Inquiries is the commission that was appointed by the Human Rights Council in I can't remember exactly the date, I think in 2016, with the mandate to investigate all war crimes that had been taken place in Israel and in the occupied Palestinian territories, including Gaza, including East Jerusalem, of course, according to the UN terminology, all war crimes of all sides that had taken place since then, and also to investigate the root causes of the conflict. Now, this Commission of Inquiries is headed by Navi Pillai, who was the previous commissioner, Human Rights Commissioner in Geneva, High Commissioner of Human Rights in Geneva. And unfortunately, she has at her record quite a few statements, sayings that indicate bias against Israel, and some would say openly anti-Semitic biases against Israel, and likewise the two other members of the commission. We have to do everything that we can, but it will not be them who investigate October 7, although they already said that they see this as part of their jurisdiction. When in my closed meeting with the High Commissioner on Human Rights, he actually suggested putting up a separate commission, a new body that he would appoint and not the Human Rights Council, and that he would select carefully, because he actually understands that the Commission on Inquiry is not the proper body to do that. I don't know if the Israeli government will collaborate with that, But I do know that the Israeli government, and I have to say also a lot thanks to my involvement behind the scenes, managing to convince them that the most appropriate mandate now is the person whom I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, the special representative of the Secretary General on sexual violence in times of conflict, because her mandate is the exact one that focuses only on sexual violence. She's not going to come here and to investigate all war crimes alleged against Israel or war crimes that Hamas did. Her focus and her mandate is narrow to sexual violence. And we need to have somebody like her come out and say openly, side by side with Bosnia, with Rwanda, with Darfur, with DRC, with the Yazidis, with Ethiopia, there is also Be'eri and Kfar Aza and the southern part of Israel on October 7. This is what happened. And we need her, with her authority, to come and say this. And she just published a statement on Friday. And I was also behind this statement. She published a statement with the strongest condemnation so far of Hamas and expressing her acceptance of the formal invitation by the Israeli government to come and conduct a visit and see for herself and talk to the victims and talk to all the stakeholders and then report to the General Assembly and to other bodies of the UN. And I really hope that this is what's going to happen. It could actually happen even this week. Unfortunately, things are a bit slow in terms of arranging all this. It could then be regrettably delayed until after New Year. But I hope that it happens now. I'll stop here because I could go on and on, but maybe we have some time for questions also.
Ruth, thank you so much. It must be very difficult for you to keep on providing the testimony of the state and of the country on your own in front of audiences. And we very much appreciate you sharing that with us. My first question to you is, how much time have you got for us to keep on talking to you? Because I don't want to make you late for your next meeting.
I can stay for 15 more minutes.
Oh, fantastic. In that case, I'm not going to thank you, but I am going to open the room to questions. If you could raise your hand or put your name in the chat, we'll give you the opportunity to speak. Ruth, while other people are coming up with questions, I've had discussion with feminists from Israel as well as other places in the world about the providing information on whether really there were sexual assaults and when you could prove them. So one person said to me, well, UN Women really couldn't put out a statement about October the 7th because there was insufficient information. And the day before, Doctors Without Borders, I don't know if this is correct, but this is what I was told, put out a statement. And because that statement was made, it was now okay for other places to admit maybe there was a bit of sexual violence. Is that why you think that so many people have been not coming out with strong statements about it?
No. When I compare the reaction of UN Women and other bodies to previous incidents involving sexual violence, take the most recent Russian invasion into the Ukraine. It took them less than a month to express grave concern about reports of sexual violence committed by Russian troops against women in Ukraine. All this is very clear, very out in the open, and called for rigorous investigation and so on and so forth. So I accept that maybe they could not have said anything in the first 2 weeks, but by then there had already been so many reports by those first respondents describing what they found. The testimony that I watched, it took probably a month for that eyewitness to be questioned in the police and to have it, in a very solid manner. But there was enough evidence before that. They did not have to conclude. All that they had to say was to acknowledge that there are reports, many reports coming out, and this must be investigated. And they didn't say that. Now, I'm not sure that, actually, I don't think I saw anything by Doctors Without Borders. Maybe you were referring to the report published by Physicians for Human Rights. Physicians for Human Rights indeed published a report 2 weeks ago. And that was very important because they are a very credible organization, which is also highly respected worldwide. So it was really important that they published something like that. And maybe it had something with pushing Guterres. UN Women gave their statement only after Guterres spoke at the Security Council. This is what cleared the way for them. But I've been asked very often how I explain the delay and the long silence by the international community. And I think that there are several reasons there. Probably the strongest one is the inability of so many of these bodies, these mechanisms, to step out of their conventional frameworks that always see the Palestinians as the ultimate victim and the Israelis as the ultimate aggressor and oppressor, and to accept the fact that this time it flipped around was very difficult for them, especially when, as I mentioned before, very soon after October 7, the picture that the world had seen changed, and constantly seeing the devastation and the casualties in Gaza. And I always say that I do not deny for a moment the sufferings of innocent Palestinians, including women and children in Gaza. And I think that they too are victims of Hamas. Hamas is committing war crimes by using them as human shields, by hiding their ammunition in beds of children and in schools and in hospitals, operating their headquarters underneath hospitals. So they are victims too. But there is absolutely no possibility to even start comparing or engaging in this symmetry. Legally and morally, this is a completely false symmetry. The operation of Israel in Gaza is being conducted according to the laws of war. There can be questions about this. There can be investigations into the question of proportionality and necessity and et cetera, but sorry, just hold on for a second. I think
You can't hear us anymore? We can't hear you though. We still can't hear you.
we overcame
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, now you can hear me? Okay, okay. Technology. So I was saying that whatever Israel is doing in Gaza, there is room to look into the questions of proportionality and necessity in line with the norms of humanitarian law, of the laws of war. And it could be questioned. It could be questioned. You know, I'm not a spokesperson for the government, certainly not for the military. And I'm aware that the mounting casualties are first of all, they're horrific. I cannot say that I don't empathize with people in Gaza. As I said, many of them are innocent. But again, this is within the framework of international law because Israel has the right to self-defense. Israel has the right to existence. And without eradicating Hamas, Israel will not be able to survive. Israel will not be able to exist. We now have almost 200,000 IDPs in Israel, internally displaced people, who cannot go back to their homes, to their houses, to their kibbutzim, to their villages, unless Hamas is eradicated. Israel had no choice but to engage in this assault, and it will be examined in light of international law. But there is absolutely no room for sexual violence, for rape as a weapon of war. This is completely beyond any scope of legal measures, of legal parameters, of international law, of humanitarian law. This is completely else. So there is no room for this kind of false symmetry.
Thank you very much. Danielle, have you got a question there?
I do. What?
And sorry, before you ask it, can we put Ruth back in the spotlight, please?
Oh, sure, sorry. What can we as Australians do to help the war effort or to help ensure that women's voices are heard and that this story really gets out?
First of all, going back to the denial campaign, the campaign of denial takes place mostly on social media. And there was a fascinating report by New York Times a few weeks ago, focusing on Twitter and Twitter and TikTok, and proving how Hamas, together with its allies, China and Russia, is in fact engaging in this campaign of denial, and with huge success. A third of young adults in the United States between the ages of 18 and 24 actually believe that October 7th never happened, that whatever Israel says about October 7th is lies, is fake, is false. And this is just the proof of the success of the denial. Could never understand Holocaust denial, but now we actually see a similar pattern happening, in spite of the fact that the terror, the massacre of October 7th was probably the most recorded crime ever committed in humanity, because we said at the beginning, they came equipped with body cameras to actually film and record everything that they did. So social media, you can and you should engage in social media and combat all the fake that is being spread there, and refer to all the news media, the reports that are now emerging. And of course, it's not just me who's giving these interviews and giving information. There are many of us doing that. So there is a change in international, in the traditional media. There's huge change. I can share, I can maybe send to Melinda a number of links, CNN and Sunday Times and Guardian and PBS and you name it. and you can spread it. You can spread it. This is a very, very important battleground. But there's also another front line, and that's the political front line. There still are a number of countries, including in the Western world, who do not recognize Hamas as a terror organization. The UN, of course, does not recognize Hamas as a terror organization. So those of you who have, influence over political leadership, whether in Australia or outside Australia, the aim should be to have as many countries join in naming Hamas a terror organization. We must achieve a situation where there is a coalition against Hamas, just like there was a coalition against ISIS. Hamas should be eradicated from the face of earth. And the way to do it, and it's not just the problem of Israel, it's the problem of the whole world. Certainly the problem of what we usually refer to as the Western world. And the way to do it is not just by force, as Israel is trying to do now. It's by economic sanctions. It's by going after their allies. It's by going, I wouldn't say Qatar now, because unfortunately we need Qatar now to rescue all the hostages. They are indispensable now. Unfortunately, they are the only ones who can continue their serving as go-between and please God, bringing all the hostages back. But afterwards, it's Qatar, it's Turkey, it's Hamas has so many allies, and the free world, the Western world, must go after them as well. So this is another area where each of us should be engaged in.
Thank you.
I just
Anybody else?
add,
Oh, yes.
hi, I'm sorry. My name is Leah Geppinger-Levy. I work with Ruth at the Rackman Center. I would just add that I think we also try to get a lot of information out to our donors and partners overseas and friends overseas. If you know, I'll be more than happy to share with Melinda the links that Ruth was talking about, and also if anyone's interested in signing up for our newsletter so that you can receive. We try to only send newsletters out quarterly, but in light of what's happened since October 7th, we send them out a little bit more frequently, but it's not too often. But we'd be more than I'll share the our newsletter with you, and we're more than happy to have new registers for the newsletter. So that's another way you can get information on an ongoing basis.
And I would second the fact that the newsletters are very informative and they don't fill your inbox too frequently.
Thank you. That was the point I was trying to get across.
Melinda, I think I would have to leave now because
yes, I just looked over at the time and thought I'm not even going to try and squeeze in one more question. You've been so generous with your time as usual, Leah. Thank you also for all of your help. The women of Australia have been working quite hard to make some sort of response to what is going on in Israel. There have been a number of rallies. There have been people taking part in all sorts of vigils, all sorts of activities of different sorts, including singing Kul Olam with the parents and families of hostages, and including more serious events. We'll continue to watch you, support you. If there's anything we can do to help you, please reach out, because we're here. We've got our network that we can reach out to, and the world changed for every single one of us on the 7th of October. And we should make the strength that comes out of that positive rather than just the negative feeling we so often have. So thank you for presenting tonight, and thank you also for all the amazing work that you're doing for the Jewish world. You know, we need you very much, and so you're very much in our hearts and in our mind all the time when you're out there working, and wishing we could do something, whatever it is, to help further. Thank you very much.
We appreciate the warm words, and I want to say that each of us here in Israel is very, very grateful, knowing that we have your support, and knowing that you are concerned about us, and you're thinking about us, and you're supporting us in so many ways. I think that after October 7th, the whole perception of the fate of the Jewish people has taken a new angle. And so these kinds of relations and connections and partnerships are ever more important for us. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And everybody, it is nearly time to light candles if you're in New South Wales, in Victoria. And so Hag Sameach. And we did have someone who was going to sing, but she decided that her voice wasn't going to work well across the internet. So I'll now say good night to everybody. Thank you so much for your attendance, and we'll see you soon.